this is the government which, in fact, was the only one to reach the capacity in the immigration program at 500.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Pack on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the immigration strategy may be starting to mature, and I'm glad to hear we've hit 500, but the province with a similar population is Manitoba, and they now have a cap of 5,000. And I think that we need to think big and get to that 1,000 or that 1,500, and then the 1,500 by 2020, and we're going to have to get moving on it. And again, this is tied into the future and the economic prosperity of this province. We're going to need those immigrants in order to help us move forward with the jobs that we're going to be generating, the jobs that the government's boasting about. We know that we need to use everybody here, and we need to bring more people. So I'm asking, will the Premier put this on the agenda for his visit to Ottawa, because I believe it is one of the most pressing issues facing us.
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the points, for the most part, that the member made is exactly the points that I made to the Prime Minister when I last spoke to him about the question of immigration. The limits, including the caps in Manitoba, were put in place at the same time, and we have tried to prevail upon the Minister of Immigration and others to understand the inequity that is inherent in the current system, and have asked him to understand the need that the province of Nova Scotia has, especially with an aging demographic, with declining numbers in our workforce, to have a larger share of the number of immigrants who are coming in. So in addition to the nominee program, Mr. Speaker, we are working with the Department of Immigration in Ottawa to look at the other streams that are available of people who are coming to Canada, to see if we can get a larger share of the other streams that are also coming into this country, so that if the federal government sticks with the caps that they've put in place, then we may be able to increase the net immigration into the province by taking immigrants from other streams in the federal immigration program.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, in 2002, when discussing the opening of a new business, creating real jobs in Cape Breton, the Premier's friend Rick Clark said, and I quote, "Here you have a new operation, and they are at loggerheads about what needs to be done. First contract arbitration would prevent that." Mr. Speaker, it's no coincidence that the Premier's view mirrors so closely those of his friend and his leading economic advisor, Rick Clark of the Nova Scotia Federation of Labour. Rick Clark may want first contract arbitration, Mr. Speaker, but no one else does. No one's asking for it. No one certainly voted for it. So my question to the Premier is this: along with Rick Clark, who else is he listening to when he comes up with schemes like first contract arbitration?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, this question, or a form of this question, has been asked over and over again. Mr. Speaker, as I pointed out, 85% of Canadians are already covered by first contract. It's a standard piece of labour legislation across the country, Mr. Speaker. It was brought in by Conservatives, it was brought in by Liberals, it was brought in by New Democrats. Mr. Speaker, it was brought in the various provinces in the country simply because it was good legislation. It was brought in federally, I understand, by the Liberals. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure exactly what the objection of the member or the Leader of the Conservative Party is, but perhaps he'll better articulate it.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, a moment ago I compared this to the flu. I was trying to be funny, but when I asked my first question, the Premier said 80% were covered, and now it's 85%. Maybe it is just as contagious as the flu, if it's already gone up by 5% just in the last few minutes. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Management Review Committee was set up in a way that excluded non-unionized workplaces. It is those very non-unionized workplaces that have expressed their concerns about this legislation with the Premier privately and also publicly on the infamous study day that was held by the Minister of Advanced Education and Labour. I'm hopeful, Mr. Speaker, that the Premier will take the concerns of these people who actually create the jobs in our province seriously So my question is, will he take their concerns seriously and put the brakes on this crazy scheme? Will he stop listening to his friends like Rick Clark and do what's right to protect jobs in this province, put a stop to first contract arbitration?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the manner in which the government brings forward its legislation is based on what is best for all of the people of our province, Mr. Speaker. I know that the leader of the Conservative Party also knows that first contract arbitration in every jurisdiction across this country that has already brought it in place doesn't apply to non-union workplaces, and if that legislation comes forward here, it won't apply here either.
The leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in this House last week, the Minister of Labour told us all that the Labour Management Review Committee was meeting just this very week to analyze all of the input that it's had from its various consultations. My question to the Premier is a relatively simple one. Will he commit today to making the report of the Labour Management Committee and any of the recommendations and correspondence received public in this House so that all Nova Scotians can read and understand that the advice is getting on this important and misguided idea of first contract arbitration?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, when the LMRC comes back to government with their analysis, I'd be happy to share their correspondence with the minister. But I do note that, you know, not having heard any of this, he talks about it as being somehow misguided, and yet, you know, the vast majority of jurisdictions in this country already have first contract, and I've said better than 80%, more like 85% of the people of Canada are already covered by first contract.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal caucus revealed yesterday the secret plans of the NDP to cut $2 million from the Department of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal's winter maintenance budget. While the NDP government told Nova Scotians cuts were coming to health and education, the $2 million cut to transportation infrastructure renewal was kept quiet. We now know a committee of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal staff is sitting in the Johnston building in downtown Halifax proposing changes to winter maintenance on Nova Scotia's rural roads. And my question to the Minister is, will the Minister indicate why this review to the winter maintenance budget was kept from Nova Scotians?
Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure that meeting never will take place unless the curtains are properly drawn and the lights are turned down, and make sure the room isn't tapped because somebody may be out there trying to find a conspiracy theory. Seriously, Mr. Speaker, I want to take a moment, if I may, and point out to Nova Scotians that over the past number of years, you know, I've been in depots and sheds all across this province. I've met with plow operators. I've met with men and women who operate this equipment. We have over 400 pieces of equipment. That 400 pieces of equipment are responsible for a lot of roads. I heard the leader of the opposition yesterday make some comments about dangerous roads that have not received proper snow removal treatment. Men and women that operate this equipment take great pride. The $52 million is a big part of our budget. You know, if the health minister is working with her staff, if the health minister is out there trying to work with the DHAs to try to help us get back to balance, if the education minister and all the other ministers on this row and the ministers in the back row doing the same, as the Minister of Transportation Infrastructure, I'm obliged to do the same. Nothing secret. It's been an ongoing review for a number of years. Please be aware of the fact that supervisors' overtime is being cut back. That doesn't seem to get a headline. Supervisors' overtime is being cut back. Salt management's being looked at. Salt management's being looked at. And plow routes are being reviewed. We had plow routes in this province, Mr. Speaker, that are 70 kilometers long, and others are 25 kilometers long. My question when I looked at that was, let's have some consistency here. I mean, I was the one, as the minister said, let's look at the consistency for when this thing, and I know you want me to wrap up.
Thank you.
But the opportunity, of course, comes once in a while to get my feet and keep my cool, and I'm trying my best.
The honourable member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to government decisions that could affect the health and safety of Nova Scotians and on their roads, I have to say to the Minister that I make absolutely no apologies for bringing those concerns to the floor of this House. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are asking what's going on with this government. The Minister of Finance stood up earlier saying he's given no directives as Minister of Finance to education or to health to make cuts, yet now the Minister of Transportation tells us that he feels someone, we're not sure who, has told him that he should be making cuts as well. Nova Scotians deserve to know what cuts will be made and what impacts will that have on their roads. It is very clear that had we not raised this in the House yesterday, this information would not have been made available to Nova Scotians. So my question again, how can the Minister stand in his place and suggest that cutting $2 million from the winter maintenance budget, whether it be reduced ploughing or reduced salting to rural roads in Nova Scotia, is not going to have an impact on the safety of Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure, Renewal.
Mr. Speaker, that's an irresponsible comment by a member of this House. It seems to me that what the implication is that I would, under some of these circumstances, compromise the safety of the motoring public by making these sorts of decisions. I am absolutely not going to answer that question. I'm not going to, it doesn't deserve an answer because of the tone it was delivered.
The honourable member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would highly recommend that the Minister of Transportation go back and look at some of the comments he asked in opposition from 1998 to 2009 and see what kind of tone that he was using in this House. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that's saying cuts to health care won't affect patients, cuts to education won't affect students, and now cuts to transportation won't affect road safety. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are telling us the exact opposite, and that's why we're bringing those concerns to the floor of this House. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, it's Nova Scotians who will make decisions as to what the impacts are of this government's decisions, not the people here in this House. But my question is, being this review has been done in secret, will the Minister at least commit today to table in this House all documentation and correspondence so Nova Scotians from one end of the province to the next can know what reduction in services they can expect from his department this winter?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure, Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One report is not available for these sorts of things. If you would like to talk about Cape Forshue and what's happening there, if the members from Cape Breton would like to talk about some improvements they can have, we can have staff available to do it. But if you expect me to come forward with a report that's going to be of that scale, that takes too much time for my staff. I'd like to point out to you, however, I'd like to point out to the member opposite, however, Mr. Speaker, if I may. Anytime members of the House, and I've had some members of the House who brought the concerns to my attention, could we sit with staff and get a clear explanation? And I compliment them on doing it in that manner. Some members of that caucus, incidentally, Mr. Speaker, of which the member is speaking. It concerns me that Nova Scotians are going to be under the, how do we put it, false impression, is that appropriate with this parliamentary language, that we will have unsafe roads because we don't have enough plows, we don't have enough salt, we don't have enough money. That is not the case, Mr. Speaker. I thank you for your time.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Community Services announced changes to a program which increased income thresholds to support more families. I wouldn't get too excited because I think there's some embarrassment about to come. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health and Wellness falls short when it comes to assessing income guidelines for her department's own boarding, trade, and ostomy program, better known as the BTO program. Mr. Speaker, in order to qualify for the program, you must not only be struggling with all of the challenges associated with battling cancer, your family income cannot be greater than $15,720. My question to the Minister of Health, why does the Minister of Health and Wellness continue to ignore the fact that the qualifying income of $15,720 for the BTO program is unacceptably low?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've had this debate in the past with the former health critic of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, we have many programs in our department that have income tested thresholds. And Mr. Speaker, I have asked my department, and I continue to ask my department, to keep me appraised of reviews that are done routinely as we prepare for coming budget deliberations. The program that's in place with the thresholds exists for this year, and we constantly review those as we look toward budget preparation for the following year.
The honourable member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, families who have a loved one battling cancer, just like every other family in this province, are finding it tough to make ends meet. Gas prices since the last time this program saw an income adjustment have risen 100%. Power rates in this province have increased 36% in the last 10 years. Last time the income threshold for this program increased was 17 years ago under a Liberal government. The BTO program quite simply helps cancer patients with transportation costs to Sydney or Halifax for treatment. It helps with boarding costs when assessing treatment, and it helps with ostomy supplies. My question to the minister, will cancer patients who are struggling with everyday costs ever be made a priority by this government?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, people who suffer from cancer certainly are a priority for this government. That's why we invested $3 million, Mr. Speaker, with the Cancer Society's Lodge That Gives for their capital campaign. The first ones to come to the table with money for the expansion of services so that when people come from around rural Nova Scotia to get treatment here in the capital district, they are able to have their lodging covered, and they don't have to worry about where they're going to stay and how much that costs. And that makes a huge difference in their lives, Mr. Speaker. Additionally, we have invested millions of dollars in radiation treatment expansion so that we will be able to meet the radiation wait times guarantees, Mr. Speaker. So we have invested millions at a time when it is very difficult to find additional money in the area of cancer treatment and cancer care, and it will continue to be a priority, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member for Pictou East spoke passionately about the need to increase the income threshold over 2 years ago. No change. At that time, the member spoke of 15 years of no change. It has now been 17 years. The NDP increased the HST by 2% for every one of those families. Gas prices have increased. It's become more expensive for power, which oftentimes is a source of heat for families, yet this government has failed to act. Why does the Minister of Health and Wellness continue to ignore the good advice of her own government colleagues when it comes to acknowledging that cancer patients seeking life-saving treatment also experience financial hardships?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I also, in addition to the millions that we've invested in the Canadian Cancer Society Lodge That Gives capital campaign, the radiation treatment, we have put many, many, many new cancer drugs on the Nova Scotia drug formulary, so people with cancer will have access to pharmaceuticals without incurring any costs, Mr. Speaker. And in terms of people who struggle day to day with the high cost of living, this government has invested heavily in terms of affordable tax credits, Mr. Speaker. And I want to remind the honourable member of what the last Liberal government did in terms of people living with low incomes. That was the government that removed the inflation protection for families living on social assistance in this province. And Mr. Speaker, it has taken many, many, many years for a government to address the damage that they did to low-income families.
The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Education. Yesterday in this House, the Minister was either unwilling or unable to respond to my question about student-teacher ratio. She suggested, and I quote, "That's calculated by how much money is provided to school boards." Well, I trust the Minister has now been briefed and has a better understanding of what we both agree is, and again I quote the Minister, confusing to people. So my question to the Minister is this: will she help members of this House and all Nova Scotians understand the student-teacher ratio and how it's calculated?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I must say that I did make an error yesterday in the ratio that I gave. And I would like to say that the number of full-time equivalent teachers that we now know of as of October were 9,664. The projected total student enrollment, and these are our figures from September, are 124,987 students. And I did tell the House yesterday that the ratio was 1 to 13, and my error is that I would like to correct today, is teacher ratio is 12.9 to 1. I'd like to table this.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it gets worse every time she does the math. So my question to the Minister is this: if she is now standing behind a 12.9, would she please help this House understand the question, which was, how is it calculated?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's based on the number of students that we have for projected enrollment. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, in a response to the question about sharing the information, the Minister agreed that as soon as she had the data, she would table it in the House. And I thank her for that. I understand that that information is available in the schools. The Minister stated that the student-teacher ratio is, and I quote, not necessarily mean one teacher per classroom. So my question to the Minister is this: in order to continue or to discontinue the confusion that's been caused, will she please share and agree that when she tables this information, she extrapolates the exact number of teachers who are in our classroom, registering a class and providing direct instruction, not principals, guidance counselors, vice principals, consultants, and you name it?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
You mean like Karen used to do?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The department is working on providing that information. We don't have all the information on our class numbers coming into the department, but as soon as that is available, I will definitely be tabling that. I would like to say that we will do our very best to provide the information of the teachers in the classroom. But as the honourable member knows, Mr. Speaker, that principals sometimes are in the classroom. Guidance counselors are in the classroom. So it's going to be very difficult to make that direct correlation. But Mr. Speaker, I will be providing the House with the exact numbers of students and teachers, and as soon as that is done at the department, I will be bringing it to the House. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when women and children flee violent situations, many turn to shelters and transitional housing to provide a warm, safe refuge. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, those organizations on which so many women and children rely have serious concerns of their own. Shelters and supportive housing organizations are not immune to increasing power rates. These organizations are at risk of becoming yet another victim of this government's inaction on exorbitant power rates. These agencies are worried that the vital services they provide to families leaving abusive situations will be threatened as a result. Mr. Speaker, when will the Minister of Community Services stand up to Nova Scotia Power and stand up for these organizations who provide shelter and support to those who need it most?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to stand here in this House and say that it is our government, for the first time in over 10 years, that invested $500,000 in transition houses, because both sitting on the other side never listened to what they had to say. So we're the ones who listened, and we're the ones who gave them money for the first time in decades.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, since 1983, Alice Housing has provided safe, affordable housing for women and children leaving abusive situations. Mr. Speaker, as power rates increase, it becomes more difficult for Alice Housing to operate. Each year, power costs eat up a larger portion of their operating costs. For example, Alice Housing will be installing security cameras in the coming months to make their facilities safer for their clients. These cameras need electricity to work, and these costs will come out of Alice Housing's budget. What is the minister going to tell the women and children of Alice Housing when they can no longer access services because these high power rates have crippled the organization they've come to rely on?
Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, I think it's very discouraging and disappointing that there's always so much fear-mongering when you're talking about vulnerable individuals in the first place that are dealing with issues in their life, that they need support from the people of Nova Scotia, they need support from the province, they need support from the government and the opposition, not standing there trying to scare people off that suddenly the doors are going to close tomorrow. We take time to sit and to consult with these organizations. We've made investments in those areas. We've invested over $100 million in 2.5 years towards helping individuals in Nova Scotia. Not one of them on the other side of this House can stand up and say that.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, the minister is a little confused because we don't control the money, they do. So we can't sit down and give the money to these organizations. But I can tell you we are consulting with them. That's how we found out this was a problem. And they're coming to us because the government isn't listening. That's right. Mr. Speaker, rising power rates are affecting the operations of organizations that offer critical services. They will have a direct impact on the services that organizations like Alice Housing can provide, and in turn on the families who access their services. Mr. Speaker, will this government commit to addressing skyrocketing power rates and assure Alice Housing and other supportive housing organizations that they will not have to turn families away because service providers cannot pay their power bills?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, this is a very caring government, and we have proved that through the monies that we have invested, through the processes that we have provided in terms of consultation. And when that party had an opportunity to be in government, there's a couple things we should remind them of. Number one, as my honourable colleague said, they de-indexed any dollars for inflation for people on IA, which are a lot of these women and family members and children that access that type of service through transition houses. Action speaks 1,000 words, so we'll see that what their action was in the past. And my other question is, if they're so concerned about these organizations, why didn't they take their trust fund and donate it to them rather than putting it into some political think tank? That doesn't help them out.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. One of the challenges for law enforcement in this province is keeping tabs on people released on bail who don't respect curfews. Why did the minister cancel the electronic bracelet monitoring program that helped police make sure criminals respected their curfews?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, thank the member for that question. It's a very simple answer to that. It wasn't being used to its full capacity. In this government, unlike the opposition, the Conservative government, when they were in power, they believed we take a good taxpayers' dollars and just throwing them out the door or burning them. This government believes in spending money wisely, and we've looked at the money and reinvest it within the system. Thank you.
The honourable member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, a recent federal Justice Department study revealed that men released on bail for assaulting their partners return to assault them again. It also revealed that men with violent criminal histories are twice as likely to violate bail conditions and go back to harass or assault their wives or their partners. Why is the Minister of Justice satisfied that women in Nova Scotia are less safe than when this program was in effect?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Once again, the Conservatives come by with their ideas that they're going to create fear and saying that people aren't safe. They are more safe. That's one of the reasons why this government took a leadership role in introducing the domestic court process. It's going to happen in Cape Breton. That's a good dollar that go in there and help a program there. On the issue of violence, men's violence against women, we are completely focused on that issue, and we're setting up programs to address that very point within our overall crime prevention. So we are committed, this minister is committed, any violence against any person, in particular men's violence against women.
The honourable member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this minister said in 2009, on October 15th, 2009, that he actually liked these bracelets. Mr. Speaker, if we want the convicted to obey curfews, we need to have them know that police can monitor them. And if we talk about value for money, when will the minister restore this program to save police time and money, to focus on our safety instead of wasting their days driving around to see if criminals are at home respecting their house arrest?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for that question. One of the great things about police work is being able to check up and monitor people, especially people that have a criminal behavior. And in consultation with this decision, we consulted with the police community, and they have more than the capacity to address this issue, and it makes good policing to be out there monitoring people and having a human resource do it, and at the same time investing our dollars wisely. I do understand why we have the financial problems we do. The Conservatives believe in taking money, lighting a match and burning it and throwing it out the window.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, crime, violence, unsafe streets continue to be a concern for all Nova Scotians who want to ensure that we have a well-functioning justice system and correctional system here in this province. The Minister of Justice has said time and time again, based on his previous background in law enforcement, that if you do the crime, you do the time. Mr. Speaker, our criminal justice system is based on the fact that if you are convicted of a crime, you will be incarcerated and you will lose personal freedoms and be under constant supervision during your incarceration. My question to the Minister of Justice is that, does he believe that that is the way a well-functioning criminal justice system should work in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I'm not really clear on the member's question, but if I understand it correctly, I firmly believe in the quality of employees that we have here to provide good quality service to our clients that are faced with being residents in our correctional facilities. And they do an excellent job, and we have a good system there. I know that when I first came into office, that we were burdened with a number of problems and inefficiencies and poor management from the previous administration, and we have addressed most of those, as you see, through the present chain of events that have occurred.
The honourable member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly I'm well aware of some of the issues that existed with the previous administration, which I brought to the floor of this House on numerous occasions. And I'm pleased to hear the Minister of Justice's response that you do the crime, you do the time, and that if you are incarcerated, that I think he's complimented all the changes that have taken place. I'm wondering, based on that, if the Minister of Justice and Attorney General might explain to the the House of Assembly and to all Nova Scotians how it was that a well-known inmate at the Burnside Correctional Facility was found to have a cell phone and charger in his cell in September of this year.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, as I said in this, I'd like to thank the member for that question. I know that I've said in this House before that that when the criminal element has all day and all night to think of ways in which to breach the system, that they'll find ways to do that. And in this case, there was an unlawful piece of equipment that came into the institution. But what's key here is the quality of the staff and how efficient they were to identify that and to correct it. And I compliment the staff, unlike the Liberal Party over there, who continually wants to criticize the correctional worker here. We have the best workers that do a great job, and I compliment them on identifying that and taking away from that person.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the week before the news came out, the well-known criminal who is already stands accused of very serious crimes, violent crimes, has already escaped custody here in Nova Scotia, was sitting in his cell with a cell phone and charger. Just the week before that, because of the work of correctional officials, an inmate who had made phone calls trying to set up a hit against somebody else outside was charged because of the work of correctional workers and the supervision they do. Yet how do you supervise someone who's sitting in a cell with a cell phone and a charger? And the question becomes, how is it possible that that type of equipment, the size of that equipment, was ever brought into the facility undetected? In light of the fact that the minister himself has moved as Director of Corrections to the Burnside facility, can he explain how this breach of security has again taken place under his watch, not the Conservative Party's watch?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for the question. What's really, you can spin this whichever way you want. I like to look at it once again that the employee there did their job. They identified that there was unlawful equipment within the institution. They did it in a timely manner, and that's the good news story there. Good work.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. On October 4th, we learned the NDP government had decided to disband the Advisory Committee on Off-Highway Vehicles. Mr. Speaker, while the issue of off-highway vehicle safety may have fallen off the radar for the NDP, it's still on the minds of many Nova Scotians. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister tell us why the NDP disbanded the Off-Highway Vehicle Advisory Committee?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly all Nova Scotians want to know that our trails and byways and even our highways are safe in this province, and certainly the role of the Ministerial Advisory Committee is to provide advice to government and to the Minister in particular, and we've, I guess, transformed a little bit, still consulting with that group, but also taking in the advice and consideration of many other groups as we move forward.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the department previously, and now the Minister just today, has referenced a new forum that they will gather information on trails in the province. And yet another committee is expected perhaps to manage infrastructure funds from riders' fees. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister explain how this new forum will operate and what measures are in place to make sure that the funds spent on infrastructure actually get to trail infrastructure for off-highway vehicles?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess we're just trying to make it more inclusive, that there's more input from Nova Scotians. Certainly the advice and input of the Ministerial Advisory Committee was important, and we thank them and appreciate the work that they've done. But really, there's more than those users that use our trails. There's hikers, there's birders, there's off-highway vehicle users, certainly people on bicycles, a whole variety of folks that use our trails in this province. And so we've set up a trails forum to get the input from everyone and just have the best management coordination of our trails that we possibly can.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the minister didn't even bother to answer the question. You know, I ride a bike on the trails, but I don't pay a licensing fee for my bicycle to do that. And the off-highway vehicle owners would like to know that the fees that they actually pay are going to go to the infrastructure that they use. And now they don't have that guarantee from the province. And in fact, the minister basically in his answer just said, well, I'm not going to guarantee that's even going to happen. Mr. Speaker, you know, that committee worked tirelessly to provide advice to the government. But, you know, it seems that like so many citizen advisory committees, when they disagree with the NDP or they give advice that the government doesn't like, they disband them. They get rid of them. And this seems to be just yet another one. You know, the committee recommended to the department that a study be commissioned on injuries resulting from off-highway vehicles and how they occur. And I think, you know, whether you ride off-highway vehicles or not, you've got to agree that that's an important thing to understand so that we can make this very safe. Mr. Speaker, we've yet to see that study commissioned. Mr. Speaker, when will the minister order that study?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I think we're working with all Nova Scotians. We're being more inclusive in the groups and the organizations that we interact with. You know, certainly Advance is one of those. The Snowmobile Association of Nova Scotia is another one, and trails groups, and we're willing to work and share with all the groups to get the best possible trails we can in this province. Even more prepared.
The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. Mr. Speaker, road safety is a big concern for all motorists, and with the cuts to the brush cutting budgets this year, the department is picking and choosing areas where brush cutting and maintenance is taking place along our roads. The number of dead animals on our roads has also seems to increase. So many times, Mr. Speaker, motorists don't see these animals stepping on our roads until the last minute because of the high brush along our roads, and they don't see them coming out of the woods. So my first question to the minister is, what is the department doing to address road safety on our roads?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal.
I thank the member for Clare for that question, and of course he, along with many other members on both sides of the House, are concerned particularly when it comes to brush cutting. It remains a concern, and it is a concern that I know members opposite continually bring to my attention. We, of course, are aware of the fact that this is particularly in rural areas where there's some consequence, particularly at intersections in particular, that we're made clear, the signs are clearly identified, and the opportunity to make sure that safety in these areas remains a priority for the department. I encourage members opposite, as the members of this side of the House, to continue to bring those particular roads or intersections to my attention, and I'll forward it through to the proper authorities. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Clare on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the high grass and brush along the side of our roads add extra pressure on our drivers. On top of paying close attention to their driving, they have to pay special attention watching the sides of the road in case a wild animal runs in front of them. If brush cutting continues to be scaled back, more wild animals are going to get run over, and the number of accidents on our road will likely increase. So my question to the minister, can the minister tell us if the number of accidents on our roads have increased this year because of high brush along the sides of our roads?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. I don't have those statistics, so it would be a question I would ask, but I can use a prominent example of a member of the House who sits on the opposite side who's concerned about Route 217, where on Route 217 there was a commitment made that there would be brush cutting done in that particular road, and that when I was approached as the minister this morning at staff, I went to the staff and said, if the commitment was made for brush cutting in the 217, the commitment will be kept. That's, after all, how we get things done when a member opposite or a member of this side of the House looks at an important issue. When it's brush cutting, whether what part of the province, bring it to my attention, and I will respond.
The Honourable Member for Clare on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the local transportation district offices budgets in Yarmouth and in Clare were cut by more than 50% this year. Last year, the boat received $191,000 in RIM funding to help with the maintenance of our roads, and this year they each only received $80,000. So my final question to the Minister is, in order to help with the brush cutting on our roads, is the department planning to increase our district office budgets next year?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for the question. That is one of the ongoing budgetary pressures which I've brought forward on a number of occasions, and when those discussions begin around the Treasury Board table, as one of the members of the Treasury Board, but also as Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal, we'll make sure we get the best bang for our buck for local roads and RIM money. I can assure you of that.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, in August, Nova Scotia Power filed its updated fuel forecast based on new page remaining off the system for 2012. Yesterday, Nova Scotia Power filed its annual adjusted rates that show that without new page, rates for the general replacement load following class of ratepayers, which consist of Northern Pulp, Bowater Mersey, and Minas Basin Pulp and Paper, would go down. Based on Nova Scotia's Power's presumption, Mr. Speaker, my question through you to the Minister of Energy, does the Minister support Nova Scotia Power's position to proceed without new page?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I guess all Nova Scotians are certainly concerned about the cost of electricity, and whether it's our most vulnerable citizens right up to our largest industrial users. And I guess it's good to see an example of rates going down. So that's going to help those mills stay in business. And so there's three these large mills that will help them. And so it's a good thing, but it only applies on a certain portion of their electricity bill. But I guess any rate reduction is good.
The Honourable Member for Hants West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, according to the annual adjusted rates filed yesterday by Nova Scotia Power, if new page is to come back online in 2012, the load following rate would be significantly underestimated and would result in a cost spike for ratepayers affected by the fuel adjustment mechanism, such as seniors and low-income residents, small business, and large industrials, all of which are struggling with the spiraling power rates due to this government's calculated need to ram through its bite-the-bullet electricity plan, Mr. Speaker. The load following ratepayers are not impacted by the fuel adjustment mechanism and would not have to bear these costs, even though they were the ones who obtained the savings. Mr. Speaker, my question through you to the Minister. Will the Minister commit today to finding immediate solutions to lower power rates for all classes and stop hiding behind the URB?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And certainly we're all hopeful that the new page mill will be able to come back into production, and there's a process in place through the monitor that people are working very hard to ensure there will be good paying jobs in the Strait of Canso area, and so we'll hope for the best in that regard. But the real reason, of course, is that our power rates are so high is that over the last number of years, coal has continued to rise in price. It's up about 75% in the past 6 years alone, and really previous governments have done very little to diversify the mix in this province. This government has a plan to work on renewables and will help over time to bring the rates of electricity down.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Hants West on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's pretty clear the answer is no, and that this government doesn't understand the complexity of what's happening with power rates. Mr. Speaker, at the load retention hearing, we saw rate class representatives pitted against each other, fighting tooth and nail to avoid additional increases for their own special rate classes. Mr. Speaker, there's no money in the pockets of Nova Scotians for this government to take and to give to their special interest friends. This government's next multi-million-dollar ad campaign could be the highest power rate start here, lowest GDP growth starts here, highest taxes start here, and lost jobs start here. Mr. Speaker, we can't afford to lose any more businesses, any more jobs, and any more families to Alberta because of this government's failure to stand up for the people of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, my final question through you to the Minister. Will this Minister admit that his political ideologies got in the way of common sense and commit to immediately rewrite the bite-the-bullet electricity plan?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of failure, we've had failure from previous governments to do nothing about power rates. We've had years and years of increasing rates on fossil fuels. It's time to get away from fossil fuels and get on to renewables. This government has a plan through wind power and tidal power and natural gas and biomass to reduce the rates as we move forward. Will be good, stable, clean energy sources and stable energy prices.
The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, the Hebron Residential Centre in Yarmouth will be closing within the next few weeks, and the Minister's office has said that the space in Hebron was being underutilized. It's unclear whether the facility was being underutilized because of lack of demand or because the department was not referring youth to the facility. Can the Minister tell the members of this House of Assembly what evidence she has to prove that the need for the facility was down?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Certainly, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. We know that it is when there's any changes to be made that it can be a stressful time, but change does need to be made. And in this circumstance, we only had one youth at that facility, and we were able to find a placement that was a better placement for that youth, and that's what it's all about. It's about our children, it's about our youth, and that's why we made that decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Mr. Speaker, of course, youth are the concern here, and the way I understand how that process works is that the department refers youth to that facility. So if the department isn't referring youth to that facility, perhaps that's why there was only one client there. That's why I asked the previous question. And people in Yarmouth are concerned about what's going to happen to the youth in light of this facility going away. So my question to the Minister is, what other comparable, geographically accessible options is your department providing for youth who otherwise would have benefited from that facility in Yarmouth?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, as I said previously, our main concern is with respect to youth. And we have one of the best child welfare programs in all of Canada in terms of how we provide services for our youth. It's like in any services, there's always can be improvements, and we're always looking at that. So what we do is we look at where the best placement is for that youth, and we're strategizing in the whole area of youth homelessness and the needs for youth, and there'll be more to come in that area that is supporting the youth. And it was a good decision. I've been in that facility, and I can tell you that I would never want my son or daughter to be in that facility and needed to have upgrades and so forth. And to have one poor youth person being there was really unfair and not a good use of support for that young individual. Thank you.
The honourable member for Yarmouth on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if the minister could provide a list to this, perhaps to this House, on the facilities that are available, that are close by our area that youth can go to, then that would be very much appreciated. This is also an issue with jobs. The individuals working at the Hebron Residential Centre are hardworking, caring people, and those are good-paying jobs in our community. There's around 10 of them. And people are concerned about their jobs. So what assurance can this minister give us that Yarmouth won't be dealt another economic blow with more jobs leaving the area in light of this decision?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we do understand the stresses of when changes have to be made and employment decisions have to be made. And our staff and our government has worked very closely, and we are working closely with the employees there to be able to offer them other positions that come available if they have the eligibility for those positions, and provide training and provide as much support as possible. And as I said, we know it's a difficult decision, but on the other hand, how could we have 12 employees running a facility of that size for one youth? And it was not a good place for the youth to be, being one youth there. So we've made a hard decision, but we made a good decision, because now that facility will actually be used by YACRO, and that's an organization that supports people with disabilities. So we're moving on to do things better. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization. Mr. Speaker, hazardous material or hazmat teams are crucial to public safety and integral components of protecting all Nova Scotians. So, Mr. Speaker, my question through you to the Minister, will he tell this House who supplies hazmat services when an incident occurs on the South Shore?
The Minister of Justice. He is the MO.
I thank the member for that question. I don't have that information available at this time, but we'll get the information to him shortly.
The honourable member for Victoria Lakes on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there isn't a dedicated hazmat team on the South Shore. The area is being served by HRM or Kentville, and Kentville will only respond to accidents that occur on Highway 103. Local fire departments believe a well-trained hazmat team is needed. So my question to the Minister, will the Minister commit today to provide funding for this important piece of public safety infrastructure and for sufficient training?
The Honourable Minister of Emergency Organization, EMO.
I thank the member for the question. What I will commit to is that we'll examine the issue that he brings forward before this House, put it to the department, do an analysis on that, and we'll get back to him.
The honourable member for Victoria Lakes on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that. Mr. Speaker, on June 22nd, a tragic accident occurred in Shelburne County, an accident that resulted in loss of life and a gasoline and diesel fuel-fed fire. Unfortunately, there was no hazmat team in Shelburne County to respond. Mr. Speaker, time is of the essence in this kind of emergency situation. So my question to the Minister, will the Minister do the right thing and ensure the people of the South Shore receive timely hazardous material service, the kind that's available to other areas in the province?
The Honourable Minister of Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you, and thank you to the member. I want to say that the safety and security of all citizens of Nova Scotia is of primary importance. And if there's an area where there's deficiencies or gaps in the system and they need to be examined or improved on, we're always committed to trying to look at ways to do things smarter and better and more efficient. So if there's a gap in the system, we're going to examine it. But I want to reassure this House that each Nova Scotian, their safety and the safety of their communities they live in is of the utmost importance.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. On June 30th, 2011, the Prescription Drug Overdose in Nova Scotia Working Group presented its recommendation to the Minister of Health and Wellness. The last line of the report presented to the Minister states the working group awaits guidance from the Minister of Health and Wellness on next steps. Other than the development of a regulated methadone treatment in the Valley, could the Minister please indicate whether she has met with the working group for the purposes of providing direction on next steps?
Sure. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, the working group did indeed conclude their work. They provided me with a report. Staff in the department under my direction have taken that report and are working on an implementation plan. I meet with the staff in the department on a regular basis. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we have initiated a number of actions out of that report already, which included the implementation of a share care model for methadone treatment in the Annapolis Valley. I had the opportunity to tour in the Valley and meet with people with the DHA who provide addiction services, as well as the Mud Creek Clinic in Wolfville. And members may have seen the public education campaign that we have running right now on television stations around the dangers of mixing prescription drugs and alcohol, Mr. Speaker. So we have a number of initiatives underway to deal with this very serious matter.
Time for oral question period is over. I would now recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to rise on a point of order. This afternoon, the Minister of Community Services made remarks about the possibility of donating our trust fund. If the government wanted the Liberal Party to donate its trust fund to charities, then it should have written the bill in such a way that allowed it. But in fact, we had a legal opinion, and they knew that the provision prohibiting donation for a political benefit anytime, guys, would not have allowed it. The minister should have known that because all the articles said it at the time. If the Minister of Community Services wanted us to donate that money, then she should have made sure that it was written in such a way that would have allowed it.
I would advise the honourable member that is not a point of order. It's a difference between two members. Thank you. I will now recognize the honourable leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order. During question period today, the Premier, in one of his answers when he was defending his decision to increase the HST, said, and I quote, he had to do it because of the, quote, deficit-laden budgets that he inherited. Mr. Speaker, as a matter of fact, I have with me the message from the Minister for the Public Accounts for the year ended 2009. In the first sentence of that message, it says, and I quote, the public accounts for the year ended March 31st, 2009 reported a surplus. A surplus of $19.7 million.
Well, you missed
the Premier's exact
order, please. That is not a point of order. It's a speech. It's not a point of order. Please, it's not a point of order. Thank you. Thank you. Table it. The honourable leader, government host, the honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call resolution number 2045?
Resolution number 2045. The honourable member for Kings West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will read part of Resolution 2045 so that those who are watching today can have a sense of what the resolution was about and where we will be going with our arguments today. And the resolution that was put forward by the member for Glace Bay. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice and so on. Whereas Nova Scotians from across the province struggle every day to keep up with the rising costs of living in this province, and whereas the NDP government has only made life more difficult for Nova Scotians while allowing power rates to increase at alarming rates, and whereas the NDP government has been actively making life more expensive for Nova Scotians by hiking taxes and fees. So that's the substance today of Resolution 2045. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it is becoming apparent to all of us, the elected members in this House, as we do duty in our constituency offices. I know in rural Nova Scotia, without exception, we are hearing from Nova Scotians who are having a very, very difficult time making ends meet. This was a fall, and we're only 2 months in when it actually started back in August. And I had people coming to my office wondering about helps for their children returning to school. Because, of course, if you are on community services, you are able to get some assistance when children return to school. But I had families who were looking at fees that they would have when they would return to school. The cost of getting children ready was one that low-income families and the working poor, as we often refer to them, have a very difficult time. And so this really reflects cost of living. And I was also quite amazed in late August, early September, people coming into our office wondering when the heat rebate forms would be available to Nova Scotians. Many forgetting, of course, that it was going to be sent out to them directly. However, if they were for the first time requiring some assistance, then they could come back to my office and pick up a form. So I took a little time to check with the local Lions clubs of Kingston, Aylesford, and Berwick, who are very, very engaged and have somebody associated with social welfare issues. And over the past year or so, they have had a constant requirement as to whether it's assist with glasses, whether it's, again, electricity bill, or wondering if they gave out food vouchers. So those are, I believe, very, very significant ways in which they are having difficulty coping with that cost of living. Also, not just those that are tenants, but actually also the owners of apartments and rental houses and units, wondering again outside of the context of community services, again whether there's some provision and help when rent is in arrears. And we know that that general cost of living is made up of a number of components. And I think in our province we have to put power rates at the top of that list. And when we hear, as the member for Digby-Annapolis, I don't think he brought it up in the House, but just this very week, he had 3 of his constituents, and we all know there's all kinds of reasons and extenuating circumstances as to why, but he had 3 constituents whose power was cut off just this week. And it is one of the areas that I make many calls to Nova Scotia Power, and we are fortunate to have someone that we can chat with and try to work out a recovery plan. And the recovery plan, of course, is to help them back on track. Maybe they've never been on a budget plan, or again, costs occur that were unforeseen, and now it's a choice of perhaps between food, power, getting their child to the IWK for an appointment, and again, low-income Nova Scotians really feel the hurt when there's something extraordinary that does come along. And I think it's an area where government should not feel that they can't go hard on the power company. I know they have to work with them on a number of issues, but I think we're seeing more and more signs that the monopoly of Emera, Nova Scotia Power, perhaps is not, giving Nova Scotians the best break on power rates, and why we're hearing more and more Nova Scotians that are hurting as a result. And I think it's an area that we're talking about. We're driving hard to try to get stabilization. We know there's a lot of factors involved, but I think it's time for Nova Scotia Power to take a look at how it looks after itself in regards to the return to investors. Is an area that, in light of the present climate, they should really have a strong review and be more conscious of the hurt that Nova Scotians are now experiencing. When it comes to another area, again, for low-income Nova Scotians that require going some distance to work, putting
the required gas in the car is an area where, again, the province can make some difference. We all know that that's a global pricing system, but you know, when we talk about regulation, and regulation actually now costing us more under the UARB than it did when Service Nova Scotia was providing the service, is one, again, that we should take a second look at so that we can, again, if it's 1 cent a litre, then Nova Scotians should have it in their pockets and not going to the UARB to provide that weekly change and adjustment on gas. One of the major, I guess, areas that now Nova Scotians are very, very familiar with, again, is the tax structure of our gasoline, where we do have the provision of hitting Nova Scotians with a tax on a tax. And it's one that I'm finding more and more people actually do talk about in general conversation, do talk about in emails, and wondering, of course, is it something that can change? And I certainly assure them that it is an area that can change, and that we're working on their behalf to try and change. I believe one of the areas that we, again, could give a small measure of help to in Nova Scotians that so far has not been addressed by government, and is the fact that we have one of the lowest levels of income tax structure, whereby we start paying taxes on our income, and have roughly $8,500 earned, we start to pay taxes. We know that in most, except for one other province, the structure has a much higher baseline as to when they start to pay their first amount of tax. So it's again an area where small measures, I believe, can be taken, should be taken, to assist those that are struggling with the general cost of living. I don't think it came as any surprise that 28,000 Nova Scotians visit food banks, and again, it's reflecting the high cost of food in this province, where such a significant amount is actually trucked into the province. That's generally where a big part of costs, if we start to take a look at the food basket in Ontario or in Quebec, other parts of the country, we know that too much of our food, I guess we'd say, is traveling 3,000–4,000 kilometers, and this adds considerably to the cost. And you know, when we have 28,000 people going to food banks, we do need to remember that there are others at home. Some of those going to the food banks are single, but very often it's families, and it represents a significant number of our population. The area that we have seen, I guess, an increase in, if we look at the last few years, is unemployment. And when people don't have a regular job and an opportunity to make a living, it automatically means that there are things in the family that they have to go without. And when we look at Cape Breton currently at very close to 15%, Western Nova Scotia 10 to 11%, and the Valley at 8 to 9% without a job, those are pretty significant numbers. And again, it's one of those ways in which if we can change that area, again, those that suffer from the cost of living can in fact have a little better well-being, and a little more opportunity in our province, and again, reduce the burden that many Nova Scotians face. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Hammond Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to rise today in my place to take part in this debate, a debate that is certainly glad that the opposition brought this forward, because I can stand in my place and know that some of the things that this government is doing is ensuring that helping families make ends meet is so important, that everything that we do at the decision-making tables. Now, you know, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to begin by talking about some of the things that we have done since forming government. Mr. Speaker, those includes helping over 75,000 Nova Scotia seniors and others who live in low and modest incomes make ends meet. Now, it's interesting, though, Mr. Speaker, because the opposition doesn't mention any of those. And the question I have for them would be, does the opposition disagree with some of the things that we are putting into place? Things like some of the things that we've done for low-income seniors and low-income Nova Scotians. You know, so, Mr. Speaker, things like in the past 2 years, government created the Affordable Living Tax Credit. Now, you know, Mr. Speaker, these are very positive moves to ensure that Nova Scotians, families with young children, families on lower incomes, and seniors on low incomes provide more money in their pockets. Things like the Poverty Reduction Tax Credit, Mr. Speaker. The Poverty Reduction Tax Credit, that's more money in the pockets of people who have low incomes. Now, the opposition, don't hear anything from them talking about that. We removed the provincial portion of the HST from home energy, something that both opposition parties voted against. In fact, the Conservative Party, when they were in power, took it off, and then a year later, put it back. So what do they, where do they stand in those things? Mr. Speaker, things like ensuring that it costs no provincial tax on clothing and footwear, diapers, feminine hygiene products, things that certainly do matter to the people of this province. We also increased the seniors' property tax credit. That's, from $400 to $600. Every little bit counts for the people of this province. And you know, it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, I hear the opposition talking about, heckling over there on that side. But you know, the Liberal Party, I'd love to talk about the Liberal Party for a while. You know, the Liberal Party, when they ran for an election in the 2009 campaign, I would love to know how much their promises were in their platform. They had promises over $300 million.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. They had no plan on how to pay for it. That was the interesting part, you know, Mr. Speaker, that they could stand in their place and call for all these things, yet they call for things and then they say, oh, well, you're insurance, you can't spend government money that way, but you keep calling for other things. You know, Mr. Speaker, it just doesn't make any sense to me. You know, last year, Mr. Speaker, the government committed to refund the provincial income tax to 18,000 seniors who are on their guaranteed income supplement. I think that's a good thing to talk about, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about people on income assistance. They saw an increase by $15 per month last year, July 1st. A $5.65 million investment that will help 31,000 low-income families. For the first time in 10 years, the Nova Scotia Child Benefit increased by 22%. 22%. They didn't have any ideas in that regard, Mr. Speaker. A $4.8 million investment that will help tens of thousands of families in the province. Let's talk about the foster care rates that were increased by more than 10%. Mr. Speaker, that's the first time in a long time that families in this province who care deeply for children in need bring to this province, and that's why we increased the foster care benefit. Cuts to personal income tax for every Nova Scotia taxpayer total over $11 million. Increase to income assistance personal allowances by $15 per month. And we introduced, Mr. Speaker, fair legislation for drugs. Now, Mr. Speaker, I can go on and on and on about some of the great things that this government has done, which I'm very proud to stand in my place to support and ensure that we continue to do so. One of the things, now I know I talked a little bit earlier about the affordable tax credit. One of the affordable living tax credit, the poverty reduction tax credit, Mr. Speaker. And you know, Mr. Speaker, we ensured that those investments in families were indexed, which is such an important, we're kept pace with inflation. So again, an additional $1.6 million investment. And you know, Mr. Speaker, that's helping over 240,000 families in this province. But yet, you know, Mr. Speaker, I don't hear anything from the opposition, as I said. So, you know, we'll talk about power rates. Let's talk about power rates. Let's talk about what we did for power rates, Mr. Speaker. We took the 8% provincial portion of the HST off of home energy, which those two parties voted against, which the Conservatives put in place when they were in government, and then rolled it back for Nova Scotia families.
Order, please. The Honourable, the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville has the floor.
That's right, Mr. Speaker. And you know, the other thing that's so important to remember, that we have a plan that will ensure that we get off coal, stabilize rates, and by creating a $1.5 billion investment in green energy that will create 5,000 to 7,500 jobs. Is the opposition against that? It sounds like it. Absolutely. So, you know, when the opposition, when the Tories were in power, when the Conservatives were in power, when the Conservatives were in power, the Tories' decision to stick with fossil fuels led to rate increases of 33% over 10 years. But yet, all of a sudden, now they're talking about power rates. It's very interesting. And you know, Mr. Speaker, what we know is that to do nothing is not an option, but that's just what the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party is advocating, is to do absolutely nothing. You know, Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party, which is they say their leader says one thing, and then their energy critic says another thing. Hear him on the radio. Hear him on the radio talking about one thing that his leader says the day before, which is totally the opposite. So you know, we always hear about the Liberal Party being a bunch of flip-floppers. I would say that would be the case in this case. So we know that when the Conservative Party was in power, we know that each year rates went up in energy costs. We know that in 2002 it went up by 3.1%. We know in 2005 it went up by 6.1%. We know in 2006 it went up by 8.6%, and that was the year that I believe they cut the Keep the Heat program. 2007 was when it went up by 4.8%. So, Mr. Speaker, the record stands for itself. What we did was we ensured that last year we removed the tax, the provincial portion of the HST, off the back of Nova Scotia families. So, Mr. Speaker, these are all things that, you know, we never hear what the opposition talks about when it comes to what they would do. What would the Liberal Party do? Let's talk about what the Liberal Party did when they were in government. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about that, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal Party, that's right. You know what? I was in the education system when teachers were laid off. That's right, I was. That's right, I was. That's right, I was. Rollbacks for teachers' wages. Yeah. Laid off thousands of nurses. Yeah, exactly.
Order.
So, you know, Mr.
Order, please. The Honourable, the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and you're doing a great job in the chair. I really appreciate that. One of the things that we've done over the last year, anyways, Mr. Speaker, is moved in the right way. Let's talk about ensuring that their young people are getting a good quality post-secondary education system here in the province. Mr. Speaker, we have such a high-quality standard for education in this province with our post-secondary institutions, and we are taking the right steps to fixing. We're taking the right steps. Taking the right steps to fixing the weakest student assistance program in the country. The worst system in the country that was created by those guys over there. Making post-secondary education is such a key role in the way that we do things over here on this side of the House. It's the most effective way to support students and their families. So this past year, we invested $42.5 million to help, to put the first steps in ensuring that we fix the weakest system, student assistance system in the country. So one of the things that we've done to ensure that Nova Scotians' tuition is below the national average is investing $30 million in student bursaries to replace the expired Nova Scotia University Student Bursary Trust. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think one of the things that was said in the House, I believe it was today or yesterday, but you know, Mr. Speaker, that investment is the largest investment since the beginning of the actual student aid program in this province. That's a big investment for students, Mr. Speaker. That's a big investment, and I understand the honourable member from Yarmouth, in fact, pushed for a student debt cap, and that's what we have now, Mr. Speaker, because that's what we believe in on this side of the House. This new provincially funded commitment will provide a tuition reduction of $1,283 for Nova Scotia students studying in this province, Mr. Speaker. As I said, we created the first debt cap that party is against in the province's history, providing Nova Scotia students with a reduction of 36% in total debt under the new $28,560 maximum debt cap. We offered up to $612 per year in additional grants for those students through an increase in loan to grant ratio, doubled the in-study earning exemption on student loans from $50 per week to $100 per week, increased the amount allowed for the purchase of books by 50% from $1,000 to $1,500, protected students by capping tuition increases at 3%, and we continue the successful graduate retention rebate, Mr. Speaker, which provides a tax credit of up to $15,000 for university students and $7,500 for community college students, Mr. Speaker, that stay in this province. Mr. Speaker, we are taking the right steps forward to ensuring that we have, not only do we encourage and continue to invest in the people, in the families, in the students of this province, but Mr. Speaker, we are laying a foundation for the road ahead, Mr. Speaker. We have such an important thing that has happened over this past couple of months with the ship start here, federal government shipbuilding procurement process. Mr. Speaker, we have the subsea cable coming over from Newfoundland that will ensure good, clean energy in this province, reducing what we have in this province, which is an overabundance of coal-fired plants. We are going to be a leader in this country, but with renewable energy, Mr. Speaker. This party leads the way for a future in this province, and I can tell you that those two parties over there have no idea what they're doing, Mr. Speaker. They chirp, they chirp, they chirp. They have no idea, and I can ensure that this party will be on this side of the House for many years to come.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this is an important topic for me, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member on the other side talks about getting off coal and improving green energy. Of course, we're all for improving green energy, but we know by your own submissions, by Nova Scotia Power's own submissions, we need coal for the next 20 years. Will you tell the people of Cape Breton that those 300 jobs that are going to be created by burning coal in Cape Breton will not come there? You can have all the energy in the world. Without those jobs, my friend, there's no more burning energy. It's important because I've been elected only recently, and I can speak with some authority on the issue. The people of Nova Scotia, the people of Cape Breton, are the ordinary constituents of Cape Breton and Cape Breton North. The people that you're talking about giving all these tax credits to, they've said the same thing over and over. They've had enough, and enough is enough. They can't take it anymore, and we can't be stretched any further. Speaking of the subsea cable, the federal government has committed to that subsea cable to bring energy from Newfoundland. And we do need green energy, but getting off the coal is virtually impossible at the present time. We know we're going to need coal. Why should we bring coal in from other areas of the world and not bring and burn it in Nova Scotia from Nova Scotia? The taxes we created from 300 jobs would go well to use in this province. Money that we could use for other programs that are being cut in this province. This is a government with no real economic plan, and they've shown that time and time again. Life gets a little bit harder under this NDP government for all of us. Our students, our seniors, our everyday families. The government for the families, my friend, is not working. In Cape Breton alone, where I come from, we've lost 2,400 jobs since this time last year. That's 2,400 Nova Scotians who've lost their jobs thanks to the NDP reckless economic policies. And that's just in our own region, Mr. Speaker. But even for those who have jobs, Mr. Speaker, life becomes harder. This is a government that hits the easy button at every opportunity. Instead of making tough choices, they cop out increasing taxes and user fees. 1,400 user fees to be exact, Mr. Speaker. And believe you me, it's not easy for the ordinary Nova Scotians who have to deal with and pay for these taxes and fees each and every day. They don't have an easy button. Thanks to the NDP, ordinary Nova Scotians who are already struggling to make ends meet have to pay more. Thanks to the NDP, it costs more to get married, to go fishing, to drive a car, to play bingo. Even elevator fees are going up. Mr. Speaker, it costs more to give blood. Some South Shore District Health Authority patients getting blood work now have to pay $10 blood collection fee. And all because of the NDP's inability to manage your province's finances. As our Liberal colleagues stated, over 20,000 Nova Scotians are currently relying on food banks. Mr. Speaker, these are people that need the government the most. What have the NDP done for them? They've raised taxes on everything, increased fees across the board, hiked power rates, and they've introduced policies that have resulted in the loss of our jobs. Now we may ask ourselves, Mr. Speaker, just what is the NDP actually costing ordinary Nova Scotians? The answer, $654 per year. The NDP are costing each and every Nova Scotian $6,400 more a year in taxes, gasoline prices, and electricity costs. That's $654 more not being spent at the grocery store, not being spent on school supplies for our children, and not being spent on everyday essentials that we need to get by. But, Mr. Speaker, that's just not politicians like yourself making this case.
The ramble on this side of the room is getting kind of high. If you have conversations you'd like to carry on, please feel free to take them outside the chamber. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in June, Amelia DeMarco, a senior policy analyst for CFIB, said, "It's been a tough year for the province's business community. Tax hikes, minimum wage increases, and the talk of energy rate hikes means business owners are struggling at the same time as their customers are feeling the pinch." Well, Mr. Speaker, where do the jobs in Nova Scotia come from? Many of them do come from that very small business community. Small businesses in our province, Mr. Speaker, are going to be our future. The 10, 15, 20 job industries, if we can keep going, will be the ones that survive in our society. And if they're having harder times creating jobs, well, it only makes sense that the ordinary Nova Scotians are having a harder time finding jobs. So what do? They go out west. But it's not just the CFIB. We have all sorts of groups coming forward to oppose this government's economic policies. Remember, Mr. Speaker, Bill 100? We had hundreds of business people from across this province coming forward to say, slow down a minute. If you don't do this, we won't be able to survive. We won't be able to continue employing people. They bowled ahead anyway, because that's their style, Mr. Speaker. They take and take and take from Nova Scotians and give little back. Unless you're one of their special interest friends. And how much do they take? Well, the total increases in taxes and extra revenue is around $500 million. Mr. Speaker, that's mostly from the HST hike. They're taking $500 million more. And to do what? To close small businesses across the province, to cancel walk-in clinics, and to cancel a ferry that had a big impact on the tourism industry in the southwest Nova Scotia and all of Nova Scotia. This is a government that has proven they're capable of setting priorities. They pass the buck at every opportunity, and they're passing it to everyday, ordinary Nova Scotians. And with those few comments, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. It's always a pleasure to stand in my place and speak about issues that are important to my constituents and people across Nova Scotia. It's especially an honor to get up and speak about this resolution because it points out some very stark realities that taxpayers are faced with in this province. The fact that costs for them, for families, and for individuals, especially those that are in economically challenged areas, has actually gone up quite a bit. It's more expensive to live now in Nova Scotia since this government took office. We've had a tax hike on the consumer tax, a tax that this Premier and this party said they would not do, Mr. Speaker, during the previous general election. We will not. We commit to the people of Nova Scotia, increase your consumer taxes. No. We won't do that. We won't do that. That was a promise that was given to the people of Nova Scotia, and that was a promise that was nearly immediately broken by this government. And the Premier stands up in this House and says, well, we've kept all of our commitments to Nova Scotians. I have the pamphlets that said you wouldn't increase taxes. You did. And every single person in the province is feeling that. I get that in my office. I'm sure many of the members opposite get it in theirs. Gas prices. Gas prices have increased over 25% since the NDP has taken power in this province. 25 cents, sorry, it's increased by 25 cents. Gas prices have gone up. Power rates, beginning in 2002 to 2010, the compounded rate increases have been about 36%. 36%. These are significant increases that affect everybody and makes it more expensive to live here and makes us a less competitive province to run a business in. That's the fact of the matter. When it's more expensive to live here, when it's more expensive to do business here, it makes us less competitive here. That's the truth. That's the truth, and that's what's happened. That's right. And you know, this government does boast about being good stewards of the economy. We hear that every day. Lowest growth. They paint a rosy picture for Nova Scotians, but I'm sorry, the picture isn't that rosy in a lot of our communities across the province. Yes, Halifax is doing well. Halifax is doing well, which it should do well. It's a vibrant capital city, the largest city in Eastern Canada. God help us if it's not doing well. And I think between 2008 and 2010, jobs have actually increased in Halifax by approximately 10,000, if I'm not mistaken. But what this government doesn't recognize is that in a lot of the areas outside of Halifax, rural Nova Scotia, jobs have actually decreased by approximately 10,000. Right? Jobs have decreased by 10,000. We've experienced that in Yarmouth. We've experienced that in Glace Bay. We've experienced it in the South Shore. We've experienced it in the Valley. We've experienced it in Cape Breton. It is excellent and important to have a vibrant capital city, one that generates business, that has a diverse economic base. But what we can't allow to happen in our province is to have that capital city drain the life out of rural Nova Scotia, because it doesn't have to be the case. What we should have is a capital city that feeds rural Nova Scotia. That we have an economic generator here in Halifax that is actually providing economic support and business to other areas of the province. But right now, that's not what we have happening. We have a decreasing population in rural Nova Scotia, and the nature of jobs is changing. We are obviously shifting from resource-based economics to one that's more based in knowledge industries. But we need to figure out how we can still utilize those important resource-based industries so that our rural areas are doing well, and so that rural areas can actually benefit from knowledge-based industries as well. And I really do think that if we've seen one thing from this government, it's been the fact that there's been no economic vision. And my colleague from Cape Breton North said that, and I don't think there has been one. We've had the Jobs Where program. Jobs where? You know? You look through that program, what you'll see is a restating of a lot of programs that the previous government actually committed to. A lot of PC programs that are still in there. Rehashing of this Jobs Where program, because no one knows where those jobs are. So on one hand, you rehash all these former progressive conservative programs into this this so-called Jobs Here program, and on the other hand, you have a premier standing up and saying, well, the last two parties made all these terrible economic decisions that got us into this difficult place. If that's so, then why are you using some of the programs from the previous government? Right? There is no vision. When asked in this House about targets with Jobs Here, or Jobs Where, or Jobs Nowhere, what targets? How many jobs are we going to create? The Minister of Economic and Rural Development didn't have any targets that he knew of. No targets. How do you have a strategic plan about creating jobs with no targets? That's a question I would love to have an answer to. You can't. You need targets. You need to have a plan to actually do these things. And you need to have a way to assess whether you're being successful or not.
That's right.
And amidst all these higher costs that we have in this province, higher gas prices, higher taxes, higher power rates, higher user fees, downloading spending onto the municipalities so that they may be put in a situation where they have to increase their property taxes. I'm hearing that back home from my municipal members, and people hear it. Our members hear that from areas all over the place. Amidst all of these things, all these increases, we have a government who, in an already uncompetitive economic environment, makes decisions that further negatively impact the confidence of the marketplace here. Bill 100. Bill 100. I haven't heard from one employer that wasn't concerned about Bill 100. And when this caucus brought this issue up in the House and filibustered 2 sessions ago, I believe, we were laughed at. I'll tell you right now, we heard from the executive director of CFIB, who represents independent businesses, and everybody's riding here. She said if it wasn't for the Liberal filibuster, they would not be able to have addressed the concerns with Bill 100. They would not have been able to do that. Right? And that shows where the priority of this government is, Mr. Speaker. It's not with the business owners, it's not with the employers, the people that actually are creating jobs in this area. It's with somebody else. And I'm not even going to try and guess who it is. But it's not with them, because what we've seen time and time again is they're not listening to them. First, contract arbitration. Another thing that this government has brought forward, which makes employers all over the province, including big ones like Michelin, nervous. It makes them nervous. And they've said they might not be willing to put further investment into this province. Is that what we want to happen? Do we want to scare businesses away from investing in Nova Scotia? Because that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. And this isn't coming from me. This is coming from the business leaders, the business owners, the employers, the entrepreneurs in this province that have brought these concerns forward to every single caucus. And we're talking about them. You're not. This government is not talking about the concerns that were brought forward by these business people, are they, Mr. Speaker? But we are. And when we try to do that, what happens? We try to get yelled down by the government. We get yelled down. No. You know, and not only, okay, what is the economic vision? What is the unifying vision that this government has presented to Nova Scotians that's bringing rural Nova Scotia and metro together? What is the vision? Because the only thing that all departments are working towards is cutting stuff. Cuts, cuts, cuts. Well, right now, we're getting asked what our plan is, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order. The Honourable, the member for Yarmouth. The Honourable, the member for Yarmouth has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As always, you perform very admirably in that position. Now, we get asked day in, day out, what would you do? What would you do? Or we hear about Liberal governments from 20 years ago. And that's what we're going to blame our current situation on, a Liberal government from 20 years ago. My question to the government is, I'm a member of the opposition. I don't have the privilege and honor of being in the governing party. I don't. You do. You do. And instead of standing up and taking responsibility for your actions, taking responsibility for some of the decisions you've made.
Order, please. Just remind the member that the use of the word "you" is not recommended language in this House, and I would ask you to temper your remarks in such a way that that word is not used again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, that was the metaphorical "you" I was using. It wasn't directed towards anybody, but I won't use it again. But instead of taking responsibility on your shoulders, this government says, well, no, it was the Liberals from when Zach was 12 years old. They did this, or they blame it on the PCs. I'm sorry, but right now, the NDP is the government. Right now, it is this government that needs to make decisions. Right now, it is this government that needs to take responsibility, not past governments. I don't ever hear in my office from my constituents who are having a hard time paying for power rate increases, paying the price of gas, paying the tax increases, paying the user fees. I don't ever hear from them about what happened back in 1998. I don't. I don't hear from that. You know what I do hear about? Why are the costs of living going up under this government? That's what I hear about. Because unlike this government, Nova Scotians and our constituents are concerned about the present and the future, not the past. And that's the difference. That's the difference. And at a time when we're increasing costs in this province, when the government is taking more money out of the pockets of Nova Scotians, they're actually cutting back services, essential services to Nova Scotians, education. I'm sorry, every teacher I've talked to said any cut you make to education is going to negatively impact the classroom. Every cut. I've been involved in the education sector for a number of years. I've dealt with several ministers of education and several critics. And I'll tell you, sitting in this House is the first time I've ever heard a minister of education talk about increased funding to students as a bad thing. This is the first time I've ever heard a minister or any critic say that increased funding to education is a bad thing. Because what's not recognized by this government is that there was increased funding to education to improve educational outcomes in this province. Because Nova Scotia had some of the lowest. And the reasons we've been able to rise up is because there was increased funding, targeted increased funding for programs specified to help those students that needed help the most. And what do we have here? We have a group of people that say, oh no, enrollment's going down, so we need to cut back. It's not that simple, and this government knows it. You're cutting back funding that was going to targeted programs to increase educational outcomes. It's affecting how many teachers there are in our system, it's affecting class sizes, and it's affecting program delivery. And it's especially affecting programs that are designed to help those students that need help the most. We also have cutbacks to our healthcare program, healthcare in the province, Mr. Speaker. At a time we're letting Nova Scotia Power increase their profits, we're asking DHAs to cut back. The most complaints I get in my constituency office is around our healthcare system. No family doctors, long waits in the ER, concerns about ERs closing. And the government is going to tell this side of the House that cuts to the healthcare system isn't going to impact supports for patients? Give me a break. When our leader, the leader of the official opposition, brought up very simple ways that we can address the high costs of power rates, gas price, taxes in this province, this government decided not to move on any of them. So I'll tell you what we would have done, since the government needs to ask us so much. We would have started with a performance audit of Nova Scotia Power. There's one thing we would have done. Do a performance audit of Nova Scotia Power to see if their profits are what they say they are, to see if they can cut back, to see if they can become more efficient. What was the answer from the Premier? Oh, that's too much paperwork. Too much paperwork. Well, Nova Scotians are paying more each and every day for power. Too much paperwork? Too much paperwork? To actually have a chance to perhaps decrease power costs in Nova Scotians? Too much paperwork. What a juvenile response. Juvenile. What happens when this party says we should eliminate the tax on tax with gas so that gas is more affordable for people in the province? There's another thing that we would have done.
Immoral tax.
Another thing that we've been very clear about that we would do.
Immoral tax.
This government says no, and this is a tax that in a previous life, when the Premier was leader of the official opposition, said was an immoral tax.
Immoral.
Was an immoral tax.
Get up next, Gary.
Was an immoral tax. And then when we bring up these concerns, Mr. Speaker, about increased costs in this province, decrease in services provided to Nova Scotians, what do we hear from the government? What do we hear, Mr. Speaker? Well, we have these tax credits. I'm telling you, this is the first time I've ever heard an NDP party tout tax credits. It's the first time. It's the first time I've ever heard an NDP tout tax credits. Mr. Speaker, that's a conservative policy. Tax credits. And I know there used to be a group in that caucus whose focus, whose only goal was to support those members of our society from the lower income thresholds. And I know they're still there. I'm going to be very clear. Those people who need help the most in this province financially do not benefit from tax credits. They do not benefit from tax credits. That's a fact. Because you need to pay a certain level of taxes before you actually benefit from a tax credit. So, Mr. Speaker, where is the vision for this province in terms of making life affordable for Nova Scotians, increasing productivity, making sure we're more competitive? Where is it? We haven't seen it. The only vision we've had presented by this government is to cut. To cut, to cut, to cut. From the Nova Scotians I talk to, Mr. Speaker, we want to grow this province. We don't want to cut it back. We want to grow our services. We don't want to cut them back. We want to increase funding to education. We don't want to cut it back. We want a better health care system. We don't want to cut it back. We want economic development. The only thing that this government has done for economic development, besides the Jobs Wherever program, is using the IEF, a political slush fund that this government and members of their cabinet hated in opposition. A political slush fund. It was referred to by them. We got that term from the Minister of Finance. Political slush fund.
Nobody believes it.
That's what they've used for economic development.
It's your side, Gary.
But I'm sorry, providing money to businesses that do need support, that are supporting a community, needs to happen. But as our leader said, bailing out companies isn't economic development. It's not bringing in new industry. It's not supporting small business.
You're winning him over.
It's not promoting innovation and research. It's not promoting creativity in the marketplace. You're just supporting what's there. That's not economic development. We do want to support them. I'll be very clear. No, it's not true. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker,
that's right. That's a good point. Yeah.
The Honourable, the member for Yarmouth has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No one in this caucus has said not to provide financial support to important businesses in this province. No one has said that, so the government can pretend that we have. We haven't. But what we are saying is that's not economic development. That's not development. Development is creating new jobs. Development is investing in industries that are new, that are knowledge-based.
That's the private sector.
It's not just sustaining the old. Sustaining the old is important, but also growing our economy to new levels. And we haven't seen that sort of vision presented by this government, and that's true.
It certainly is.
Now, all these costs have been increasing for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. Increase to gas prices. We've all heard about that. Increase to power rates. Food costs going up. Taxes going up. User fees. 1,400 user fees.
That's not many.
1,400 user fees. All these costs going up, and this government stands up and applauds when a member of their caucus mentions a tax credit. I'm sorry, tax credits aren't cutting it for Nova Scotians. And it certainly shouldn't cut it for a new Democratic Party. A party who has always promoted program funding for those that need help the most, not tax credits to help them have a couple extra $100 a year. So what are you doing with the Liberals? Program funding. That's what an NDP party, NDP has always advocated for, but we're not seeing that. And let's look at some of the decisions this government has made that have actually negatively impacted confidence here and negatively impacted jobs. One that comes to mind is the Yarmouth Ferry. Surprise, surprise. A decision that this government made to cut the Yarmouth Ferry had an immediate impact on the economy of Yarmouth. 300 jobs lost as a direct result of that decision.
That's
300.
Simply not true.
300.
Simply not true.
300. And what's happening now, Mr. Speaker? Our hotels are on the verge of collapsing. We've lost one. We are at a point where we're almost losing a second.
No, it's simply not true.
We were almost losing a second, the only two hotels that we had. If we lose those hotels, we lose an ability to have conferences in Yarmouth. We lose an ability to even host hockey tournaments, baseball tournaments. Yarmouth has a proud sporting tradition, a lot of championship teams, and has always been a proud host to teams from all across the province and beyond. We lose our accommodations infrastructure. That ability is gone. That one decision has had untold negative consequences in our area and beyond. I've talked to tourism operators, Mr. Speaker, from all over this province. From Bedak, Cape Breton Lodge, from Shelburne, from Queens County. All of them have said that they had a negative impact to their business because of that. White Point Lodge lost 50% of their American business. 50% of their American business because of that one decision. No. That one silly decision because this government didn't decide to actually pay attention to the numbers and figure out what was going on before they decided to make that decision. And that's the facts. That's true. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, costs are going up in this province. People are paying more for gas. People are paying more for power. People are paying more in user fees. People are paying more in taxes. Meanwhile, their services are being cut back. The services that Nova Scotians depend on, like education and health, services that actually promote economic productivity and growth in this province, are being cut back. And how is that a better deal, I'll ask, Mr. Speaker, for today's families? And in reality, it's not. So what I'll do in closing is urge this government to actually provide some sort of economic vision for this province. Move on some of the ideas that this caucus has put forward to lower the costs of living for Nova Scotians. And hopefully we'll get back on track. Because if we don't, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, we all know there's going to be more individuals and families in our communities that come to our office weekly and monthly and say, you're my MLA, I'm having a hard time this month. I can't make my power bill. I've had a lot of people come in the last year and a half who were that close to having their power shut off. And working with charitable organizations in my area, we were able to save them. charitable organizations that do an excellent job. The Salvation Army, Tabitha Center, the Fuel Bank in Yarmouth, the Food Bank. These are the groups that are actually providing support for those individuals that need help the most in our province. It's not this government, and the tax credits just aren't cutting it.
Any young people leaving Yarmouth? Any young people leaving?
And my question to the government is, when that happens, when these individuals come to your office and say, sir or ma'am, I can't pay my bills this month. What are the members of this government going to say? Well, there's a tax credit you might be able to get next April.
Order, please. The time allotted for debate has ended. We'll now recognize the acting House Leader for the official opposition. The Honourable, the acting House Leader for the official opposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the opposition business for today. Certainly, thank you for the opportunity to raise the concerns, and we'll now call upon the government House Leader to provide the hours and order of business for tomorrow.
Chair recognizes the government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
I wish we to now rise to meet the hours of noon to 4 tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, and after the daily routine, we may call Bill 84 and Bill 85. Now, I wish you to now rise.
The motion before the House is that we now rise and meet again tomorrow between the hours of 12 noon and 4 o'clock. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried. We are now adjourned until 12 noon tomorrow. Thank you.